I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And
Don't mention
everyone
it.
out there.
So I will hand over to Jason as chair.
Thanks, Ian.
You're welcome.
So what is a quorum, Patrick? How many people do we have on BPAC?
We have 7 on BPAC, and then quorum would be 4. So we are meeting quorum today.
I have a Fairwinds is a meeting at the hospital we've had on the books for a while at 4, so I'm gonna have to leave here shortly, but we'll still have a quorum, and then Ian can take over. So we want to jump into micro mobility, which is a great word for anything electric on our roads and bike paths. Excellent.
Thank you. I think one of the things that would be helpful to do first, I know the chair and the vice chair have had some discussion about this, but would to present to you sort of the current regulation in Massachusetts, as well as some regulation that will go into effect in November. So you'll see kind of these first 2, those are the items that will go into effect in November, and everything else is already in place today. So class 1 e-bike, it's a bike that's equipped with a motor that aids only when a rider is pedaling. And that motor ceases to exist at 20 miles per hour. At class 2, it has a different type of motor, and it also can reach up to speeds of 20 miles per hour. And what this new legislation that's going into effect in November is doing is it's basically further sort of adding some granularity there to what was previously a large sort of all-encompassing definition for motorized bicycle. So that, which is currently in fact today, is still in the books. It's a motorized bicycle is a pedal bicycle with a helper motor, or a non-pedal bicycle. So basically, this one you can kind of think of as sort of a larger category of motorized 2-wheel transportation facility, and it has a maximum speed of up to 30 miles per hour. And then motorized scooters are also within Massachusetts current definitions, regulation definitions right now. One of the things to be aware of is that with sort of these new changes to definitions, the new additions, there were some changes to how e-bikes are allowed to be operated and what they're allowed to be operated on. So existing Massachusetts law for motorized bicycles, technically you need to be 16 years or older to operate the motorized bicycle. You have to possess a driver's license or learner's permit. You have to wear protective headgear. It's not optional. Riders cannot exceed 25 miles per hour, and you may operate on all ways except express state highways. You can operate on bicycle lanes adjacent to various ways, but you cannot operate your bicycle on an off-street recreational path. And that's for safety reasons. The thought was, some of these paths are not really equipped to handle these motorized bicycles. So Massachusetts e-bike laws, effective in November. E-bikes are not allowed to be ridden on sidewalks, but they are permitted on bikeways and bike paths. And so the differentiation between what's in effect today, technically, it's sort of vague, but that off-street recreational bicycle path, that could mean a lot of different things, right? Including the shared use paths that we have today. So this new sort of delineation in our definitions, my understanding is it allows for e-bikes to operate on a bike path that's separated from the street. So that's similar to the bike paths that we have on Nantucket Lake Pulpus. Key difference beyond noting that the e-bikes are permitted on on-street path or off-street paths, the thing to be aware of is that these bikes are supposed to have a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour, which is still very, very fast, right, for a bicycle. Municipal jurisdictions come November may further regulate where e-bikes can ride. However, these restrictions will require a public notice and public hearing. So that's basically to let you know that if you wanted to create a program where you said, all right, we'd prefer e-bikes not to ride in X location, you do have to make sure that it goes through a public process. But it sounds like you would have the authority to do that.
Patrick, quick question for you. Can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
So the first paragraph, existing motorized bicycles, that's not e-bikes. That's mopeds, or that's a bicycle with a motor?
So to clarify, before November 2022, let me take a step back. There's new legislation recently that updates the definitions for bicycles. Right now, e-bikes, as we know them, are sort of lumped in with this larger category of motorized bicycle. But effective in November, they're actually broken out further as class 1 e-bikes, class 2 e-bikes. And there's actually advocacy to include a third class of e-bike, which attained higher speeds. I don't really know the rationale why, but the state chose not to pursue adding that into its definitions for legal regulation. But in any case, this kind of provides a little bit more granularity here. The other thing to kind of be aware of is for a motorized bicycle, that's it's a big category, right? It includes mopeds of a certain design when they can't attain speeds that are higher than 30 miles per hour. When mopeds do go higher than 30 miles per hour based on how the engine is constructed or whatever, that's actually classified as a motorcycle. So it was a really big category previously, and it was hard to kind of get further granularity and regulation. And so I think that's the rationale for breaking it out.
Okay, so I'll just ask you this. I have a class 3 bike. That's how Europe, most of the US uses it. And it goes up to 28 miles an hour, has a throttle that goes to 20, doing nothing. You pedal goes to 28 with very little effort. Would that be a motorized bicycle?
Under come November, yes, that would be classified as a motorized bicycle. I don't think there's no class 3 bike, as you mentioned.
Right. So it'd be motorized bicycle. And that's the majority of what I see out there. They fly and they go over 20.
Yeah.
So that's helpful to know so we're all using the same language now. E-bike. Oh, that's a motorized bicycle. And here's the criteria that makes it that way.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd like to do with our MassDOT liaison is ask for some material that can be distributed to everyone in BPAC, just to kind of make sure these terms are clear in a concise way, so everybody's aware of what the rules are at the state level. I was looking through some other jurisdictions' literature, and New York City actually has a really nice diagram where it breaks out the different classes, what can be ridden where, speed limits for each class. It's very, very helpful. And I think if MassDOT provided something like that, it would be very helpful for us. And it's quite likely the case that they may already have this. I do have someone who's hoping to enter the room here. Let me see. I don't necessarily recognize this, but because it's public, I will admit them in. All right.
I think, Patrick, for someone to come in, they have to state their name. That's a number. We don't know who they are.
Oh, sure. If caller, you could identify yourself, that would be helpful for you.
I'm sorry, it's Laura Walters. I'm sorry, I had to call in because I'm at an airport unexpectedly. I thought I'd just listen in.
Okay. Oh, no problem, Laura or Ms. Walters. Thank you very much. All right.
Well,
Yes, Mr. Golding.
please, Patrick, call me Ian, and Jason, through you, I guess. So to everyone, I mean, none of us want to see these bikes blasting down the bike path, really, even 20. And and I assume we're on the same page. So how do we go about actually being able to post a speed limit on the bike path of, I would assume, 15? Or well, perhaps I should wait until you've finished your presentation, Patrick. Maybe I've jumped the gun here.
Yeah, let's wait in, because I just saw something in there that said e-bikes 25 miles an hour could be on bike paths. So we need to take all this in and figure it out.
Okay. And sorry for jumping ahead in the slides here. I wanted to be sure that we could kind of get you what you needed when you want it, but I'll be sure to kind of get you the overview first. So I think sort of the big thing to kind of take away from this conversation is that Massachusetts previously did not really do a good job of breaking out its bike classes. And because of that, it was challenging for people to know how to regulate these bikes. And you'll see different towns, at least as far as I have kind of seen to date. I haven't seen a lot of different regulatory frameworks that other municipalities are are looking to kind of implement. I think we're all in the same place right now, trying to figure out how we should regulate these things. Beyond bicycles, there's also motorized scooters. And so, there are a couple of things to know about motorized scooters. Similar to e-bikes, you have to have a driver's license or learner's permit. You must wear protective headgear. You are not to exceed a speed of 20 miles per hour. You can operate on all roadways except express state highways. If you're on a roadway, you must keep to the right side of the roadway. The idea is to have turn signals so riders may keep their hands on the handlebars. And you are not supposed to operate your e-scooter between sunset and sunrise. You're not supposed to have passengers, and you may operate in a bicycle lane adjacent to various ways, but you're excluded as an e-scooter user currently from off-street recreational bike paths. And again, that's where that kind of vagueness comes into play here, trying to define what that off-street recreational bicycle path is. I think it requires a look at sort of that definition to make sure we know what our off-street paths are. What is Pulpus Road really defined as from the state's perspective? There was a sort of a discussion about trying to figure out what other locations are doing. There's not a lot out there in terms of Massachusetts and what Massachusetts is doing, but I thought it was helpful to look at some recommendations to see what's going on in places like New York City, because they do some of these larger urban municipalities have to deal with that sort of thing, and have been sort of on the forefront in the United States and then in Europe to kind of get a sense of what they're doing as well. So there's a level of consistency across Europe. I noticed there's two different schemes, and the more conservative scheme that Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and France appear to use is that they limit speeds for e-bikes and e-scooters to 12 miles per hour. And scooters are allowed on the sidewalks in Germany under 7.5 miles per hour in some locations, but for the most part, scooters are not allowed to operate on the sidewalk. In New York City, scooters operate at 15 miles per hour and e-bikes are limited to 25 miles per hour. And Rails to Trails, which is a great sort of nonprofit that does a lot on the bike ped front, advocates a speed limit of 15 miles per hour for off-street trails. In terms of regulating location, New York City restricts operation of micromobility facilities to bike lanes and streets under 30 miles per hour. So if a street is posted with a speed limit above 30 miles per hour, an e-scooter wouldn't be able to operate on that. They are not allowed on sidewalks or paths. In Seattle, these scooters are not allowed on sidewalks or paths. And then in Alexandria, Virginia, which has sort of a historic downtown, you can operate e-bikes and e-scooters and bike lanes, streets, and some trails. So there's a little bit difference there in that they've gone ahead and defined the trails that you can use these different micromobility devices on. So I think this is jumping ahead to what Ian wanted to kind of talk about. Is I think it would be good for you all to maybe have a discussion about speed regulation, regulating the location of use, thinking about a palette of etiquette or wayfinding signs or signals that could be used to kind of help inform and educate people about any regulation that is ultimately implemented, or perhaps there's no regulation and you want to do something that's advisory only. These are sorts of options that I think you could probably consider and would be consistent with what other locations are doing. And the thing that we would have to be aware of is we'd want to make sure that any sort of ideas or preferences that you had would be consistent with state regulation, and that we'd have the authority to implement those. And we'd also have to think about whether or not we have the capacity to educate and enforce to make sure that the regulations that you're interested in are effective and people's behavior response to those. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair to kind of guide a discussion.
Well, I have to go here in a minute, but I think with e-bikes, I feel like I need to sit with this and come up with some questions of, I saw one thing in there. We do have some local control. What is that, and can we enforce it? And how much do you want to recommend enforcement versus education? and be ready, for next May when the bike paths start getting filled up. So I think we should just ask questions on the group, not to come up with the answers exactly how we're going to go forward, but just trying to understand this. And somebody's take notes, and some of these questions will go to Chief Pittman, some will go to other places, Mass Bike. And I did talk to Galen Mook, who's the executive director, and he can come on next month if we need him. Ian, you have some questions?
No, Jason, I think you've summed it up that, we should digest this and then come forward with suggestions. And Patrick, can you send this to us as a package?
Sure.
My guess is we're all on the same page. We want something that's reasonable, that I'm sure Pittman will, my guess is that the Chief Pittman will be worried about enforcement. And from my perspective, I'd rather have the signs out there to give people a framework, than worry quite so much about enforcement. For instance, if we're talking about a speed limit.
I have to run, but if we want to come up with different things that we want to ask, or suggestions of signage and spot enforcing or things like that, we could send those around all to Patrick and he could pull them all together. But I have to run. Ian, can you take over?
Okay, good to see you, Jason.
Thank you.
Hey,
Hey, Matt. Hey, Jason.
Yeah. So, but what do other people feel about this?
Can I, I had my hand up. I'm not sure if I can just talk or or
Please
that
do.
we have, okay.
Please do. I didn't see your hand up, so
It's
I
okay, it's okay.
apologize.
Yeah, was just wondering if, I know that the enforcement is is either going to be an issue or the police department here might find that an issue, but then I'm also thinking how is that being done in other places like New York? I don't know, Patrick, if you've seen anything of that. I know the Netherlands has similar rules and regulations as Germany and Denmark and Sweden. But I'm not 100% sure actually how hard everything is being enforced. I know it's a discussion in the Netherlands as well. What I do know is that there is, or in the Netherlands, we have signage of 3 different types of bike paths. So either a bike path that is just for bikes, or and I guess what would be considered an e-bike 1 or 2 here in Massachusetts. And then there is another sign which says that both bikes and those e-bikes and motorized bicycles could be on a bike path. And then there is some third sign which just says, or which means that you're allowed to bike there, but you don't have to. The third one is a little vague. But the other 2, maybe we could have certain signage like that as well, so people actually immediately from the start know are they allowed or not allowed on that particular bike path. I also had another comment maybe about the education in the Netherlands. When we're in 5th or 6th grade, every child needs to do a bike test, both written and a practice test. If you don't pass the test, it's not a huge deal, but most people actually pass the test. I actually didn't pass the practice test. This is a don't tell anyone ever, because I think I will need to be kicked off of this committee. But and it's I would still say it's a huge discussion as well. But anyway, that's when I was 8 or 9 years old. I did pass the written test, but it is maybe something that could be implemented here in the intermediate school as well, that all 5th graders or something like that would do both a written test where you learn about all the different signs and rules and regulations on the road and stuff like that. And then a practice test as well. Yeah, that you know how to implement those rules and regulations, something like that.
Interesting.
I can't raise,
Go ahead.
raise my hand, but sorry.
Go ahead.
Along with that, I know in the schools that they do have, like all the kids in 3rd and 4th grade, they had to do the swimming because the idea is that you live on an island, you should know how to swim.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with all the biking around. I mean, I think it makes perfect sense considering the rationale for doing that. You might have the rationale for biking as well as a piece of the education. But I have another question. I'm actually, sorry for the noise in the background. I've been in 2 communities recently that have a lot of biking, and I haven't seen any e-bikes, which I'm finding sort of strange. So I'm right now at the airport in Charleston, and I've been in Kiowa for a week, and tons of bikes everywhere. It's very much a biking community, and I'm curious as to why there are no e-bikes. And then I realized it's a private community, so maybe they have banned them. I did find it interesting that they have little stop signs on all of the, just like we do on all of the bike paths. But I wonder how they were able to do that. And I know that Nantucket is different because it's not private, but I kind of wonder about having certain areas where, this is just suggested, where it's allowed and where it's not allowed. And again, the enforcement's going to be the problem. But I just thought I'd let you know that there do seem to be communities that aren't allowing it.
Thank you, Laura. Any other ideas?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Hello?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I think I was hearing Laura's comment, and one of the things that I think is a sort of a trade-off, right? That you all want to weigh is sort of that balance between incentivizing alternatives to a car, such as an e-bike, but also balancing that with safety, right? I think in this position, we hear a lot about trying to reduce congestion on the island. And I think sustainable modes of transportation like e-bikes are a good alternative. I do think there are some challenges related to them, particularly speed. I think that's a big issue. But I would be hesitant to recommend full out solutions that only look at banning a bicycle rather than sort of taking or recommending to you all to consider a more strategic approach that takes more of a gentle hand to these sorts of new tools. It is true that they come with their own challenges, but perhaps they do have some benefits as well.
I think a lot of times it's also both for bikes and e-bikes or anything bike on Nantucket, for people who are trying to use the bike paths and the bike infrastructure, a lot of times the intersections are just not either designed or are not designed in such a way that they're designed in such a way that it's kind of difficult for a biker in general to go to the other side of a street or to go into another street. Just for example, if you come from the center of town onto, I think it's Milk Street Extension. So then you're on the right side if you come from town, and then you go onto the Milk Street Extension bike path, which is on the left side. So you have to cross that road, which is, it's just a little difficult, I guess, for bikers. And there are a lot of those situations where bikers have to cross the road. And then in general, I see that a lot of bikers are hesitant in the way they ride their bikes as well, which just makes it a little awkward. So I think we maybe should also look at the intersections and how we can maybe connect either a road to another bike path or two bike paths better to each other, so that it will be more clear for both the biker and the car driver, yeah, how to react in that way, if that makes sense.
It does. And, Milk Street Extension is a good example of where if you actually had a sidewalk, the hash marks going across for bicyclists, it might help them. I know it's been discussed in the past how to try and assist bikers at that particular intersection.
Yeah.
So,
Ian, may I?
please.
So,
It's 4 o'clock.
oops, sorry.
Yeah.
So I live on Hummock Pond Road, and I always am walking my dog around the cemetery, and I always see people riding the bikes out of town, going to Bartlett, Cisco, whatever. The bikers, it's funny, they'll all of a sudden notice the path to the left-hand side, and they will look back and slide on over when the traffic is past them. But most e-bikes, it's like a fun little toy, and they don't look back, and they think they're going at the speed limit, and they just zip right across. And I've seen it a couple times, and some people have come really close to getting hit. So I just think it's a new toy. I don't want to ban them, but I feel like someone to educate them, whether it's coming off the boat. I like the one at the school, having some program that each kid learns how to do that. I know there was a problem with the school and they were trying to ban them because the kids were under 16. But there has to be some way to educate people. I've been going down the bike path riding and had bikes zip by me, and I wish there was a skier's etiquette on your left, on your right, something, and I have a bell on my bike, ring your bell. It just gives you a little bit of an alert that someone's come up behind you, because they're like ninjas. They just slide right up on you and are by you, and before you know it. And as Matt said in the last meeting, someone was hit on Cliff Road, Cliff Road bike path. And so, better backed out of here and stuff like that. There has to be some way to educate people. And I think this is a really good starting chart to look at. And I'd like to, get this and digest it more. And then I think also, Patrick, if you may, how are each one of our bike paths defined? Is it follow state rules? Is it town rules? Is it, each one kind of have its own, breakdown of what they are, and then how we could add signage, whether it's a sign at each, driveway, or if it's, when you go through the HTC, you have to provide a apron, whether it's Bluestone apron or something to slow down people as they're coming in the driveway. I know when I get on the bike path, I am very nervous. So if, houses, their driveways are on the right, I'm normally on the left-hand side until I see someone coming, then I swerve over, just because I'm afraid of someone just pulling out in front of me. And I'm sure other people that ride the bike paths will say the same thing. And it's a gamble each driveway you go through or past. And I just think that would be really important, that just how to define each one. And then maybe it's just paint on the bike path or some way to delineate it, so everyone knows that something's different.
Yeah.
And I do know that through the HTC, that is one thing that's been really helpful, is to have that apron. Even on my driveways I'm pulling out, I have it, when watching my daughters, the first time my daughter was, driving her, getting a learner's permit, the first time she heard that noise, even though she had never driven, but she had heard it all the time. The moment she felt it on the steering wheel, she slowed down. She was like, "What's that?" And then she's like, "Oh, that's just that." And she pulled forward. So it just gives you that momentary noise change that just kind of awakens someone, like, "Oh, okay, I'm coming up to here," and it alerts them. So I'd like to look at this more and add my notes, and then roundtable again, and then bring in the police department and other people first to figure how far we can get it before we need more input. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, not at all, Joe. That's, I think, very useful. And certainly in terms of toys, when I was coming along Orange Street this afternoon and about at Marine Home Center, I noticed there was an e-bike right on my tail. I was going about 22 with no helmet. And so, I end up going down Union Street into town, and he's right on my tail at 20 miles an hour, no helmet. And I'm thinking, oh dear, I was just thankful that I'd seen him, because he was off on the side as though he was planning to overtake me on the inside. And I'm sure we all have stories like that. And, you know, I mean, since that article was passed, Article 71 last year, we do have the authority now to make sure that private roads and driveways stop before the bike path. I mean, I think it was already a state regulation. So to build on what you're saying, Joe, I think that you know, I absolutely share your, I wouldn't call it nervousness in your part, but it's probably nervousness on mine at this point. Every time I go past a driveway, you know, you're always on hyper alert. So, any other thoughts or?
I've got like two of them, I think. I think is everybody's kind of mentioned, enforcement is always a really difficult thing. I think especially, you know, like when you're on a bike and if a cop pulls you over, I mean, you don't even really need to have an ID or anything. The bike doesn't have to, you know, it's not like it's a car registration or something. And it's, you know, what are they even going to do if somebody, you know, handing somebody a fine? But anyway, I've something I've kind of toyed with a little bit in my head and wondered about, is there a way, whatever regulations are decided on, things can be written to turn it into a little bit of an insurance issue? So that if there's an accident, if there's something else, that you give, not, you know, that you give the insurance companies the tools to, well, they end up battling it out amongst themselves. But that stuff, you know, would eventually start getting pushed down, I would think, to the consumer. You know, I don't have any idea how possible it is. It's just it's a thought I've had. And then just sort of anecdotally, you know, I work down on South Beach Street, and I work right at the corner to Broadway, or to not Broadway. And when I'm leaving, and there's often a small backup, and I will sit there kind of in line with the cars because there really is not room to pass on the left. So I'm in no hurry generally. But the number of people who decide to try to pass those cars by going into the other lane is frightening, because there isn't room for them. And the vast majority really are e-bikes, whatever. So I mean, that's just, you know, they well, but and even riding home and getting out of town, just the education, people, a lot of them are teenagers, but people seem to be fearless. They think that they are really, you know, have a right to the road and an invincibility about them, you know, not understanding the laws of physics that say an e-bike going 30 hitting a car going 30, there's only one loser.
No, I think that's very true, John. And you bring up an interesting point about no license on them, because back when I was a kid on the island, back in the 50s and 60s, as Joe will attest, although no, he's such a youngster, perhaps he doesn't remember, but you actually had to have a license on your bicycle, and which I don't know when that ceased to be a requirement, and maybe so maybe you know, Patrick, what do you think about the possibility of actually having licenses on e-bikes, so that if one goes past you at, you know, 30 miles an hour, you can actually report it.
It's a good question. I think I'd probably need to do some research a little bit about the regulatory framework that would allow us to require people to register their e-bikes or e-scooters. I think, it's a great idea. And I think that were it to be possible, it would make things a little bit easier from the enforcement perspective, because you could actually track people. Whereas, as I think it's been pointed out, it's kind of a challenge, right? If you were to stop someone today who doesn't have any kind of ID on them, I mean, what's an officer really to do?
Right, very true.
I also think having people register them, I know that my husband's a teacher, and I know that at the middle school and the high school, they had a few e-bikes get stolen last year. So you could angle it that way too, for people to, kind of come into some sort of formal procedure of registering, for lack of a better word, a bike, because it might be in their interest if it is taken, then they can hopefully find it easier.
Thank you, Laura. That's a very good idea.
And also I guess I had 3 points. Laura's point earlier about her seeing some communities where it appears they managed to ban the bikes, and it would be, I think it's a good early place to look at, is like, what is the mechanism they used to do that? Not necessarily because we want to ban them, but because that might provide some insight onto how can we limit and regulate them. I mean, could we in some way limit or require a license on or a registration on bikes that can go, or vehicles, because the scooters also, I've been passed by an awful lot of scooters on my while I'm on my bike, but anything that's capable of going more than 20 miles an hour or whatever, or 15 or whatever number you want to come up with. So I think that is a worthwhile thing to look into. What have other communities done and how?
Great. Well, I think so. We have a lot to keep us occupied. And does this sort of really bleed in as far as everyone else is concerned with data needs and creating a critical path to develop a non-motorist crash history database, which I know Jason he may be bringing it up at the hospital as we speak. But do we have any input into that at this point, or should we follow up to ask Patrick for the transportation project updates?
Well, if I may, I think what would be helpful here is, I think anecdotally, there's been a lot of discussion about where, seeing e-bikes around, and the weather is starting to turn. So it's likely the case that we'll see fewer of them as time progresses. But I think what might be helpful to kind of support any decision-making that you make, in addition to sort of the critical path, which I think is worth discussing in a minute, is kind of, do you want any survey work done? Because we don't have a level of granularity about how many of our bikes are e-bikes today, how many scooters are at certain points. I mean, if you feel like it would be helpful, we could plan to do some survey work. If you don't feel like it will be helpful, maybe it's not worth the level of effort. Just kind of put it out there. If you're trying to actually gauge how many of these things are on the shared use paths, or how many are actually riding in the road, maybe you want that. I don't know.
Can we get any of that data from like the automatic like traffic data that we have on certain points on the island? Like, I know that they can see a difference between cars and bikes, but I don't know if they can see a difference between what type of bike or how fast the bikes are going.
It's a good question. I can follow up on that. To my knowledge, there's one location where we do have an automated traffic counter, and that's Goose Pond in Orange. There's that camera where the rail trail kind of terminates right there on Orange Street. That one, I'd have to see how it's calibrated. My sense is that it probably does not differentiate between bikes and e-bikes, but we can certainly look. I think in this particular case, this would be one of those items where you probably have to, I'd probably have to plan a couple locations with your guidance where I just plunk myself for the day and count bikes, if you felt like it would be helpful. But I don't know if the counters that we have or that we could obtain would be sophisticated enough to differentiate. I know the ferrous metal counters, what they do is they, if a bike goes through and disrupts the magnetic field, it counts that as a bike. But if it's a bike, it doesn't differentiate between speeds. Tube counters you could potentially figure out a way to do it with tube counters on a path, but I'd have to put some thought into that.
Joe,
Because
are you volunteering to count, or do you have an obligation?
Yeah, I'm a mathlete. I can do that. I can sit there. Give me a little clicker.
There we go.
I was wondering if, most e-bikes, my understanding is that they are topped out at 20 miles an hour, but then you can go get a modification and then you can, go up to 30 miles an hour. So I didn't know if it was a way of finding out if a bike is modified or not modified, and the speed, but also people are probably going to hate me for saying this, but is there a way to go to the police department and you register your bike for $5 and you have a little 10 questionnaire about like how the bike paths work, etc., and your helmet, etc. Is there some way to do that? Make it really simple and easy. I mean, the mopeds have to do it, motorcycles have to do it. I think that this is almost the same. When you top over 20 miles an hour, I think that you need some sense of security and education about what are you doing. People are getting them and they're just like taking off, and it's now this accelerated bike that just is magical in some ways. I generally, wherever I go, I'm taking my helmet with me on my bike, whether it's in town or going up to Cisco to meet friends for a beer or something. I have my helmet, but most people don't, or I see them not buckled or in their basket, which is kind of funny. But I feel like I know the mopeders, when they rent them, they have to do a cast. They have to go around the block and get a helmet. It's not the best program, but at least it's something. It's better than nothing. So I don't know if that's something to consider. Like I said, whatever the dollar amount may be, but at least you've gone, we know what it is, we know how many, it may be a quick way to find out how many is going on and how many bikes are on the island, and maybe a better way to educate people over 20 miles an hour to say, all right, you're on the bike path, can't go over 20, we respect that, but be considerate of other people, and I think that's something we should look into personally. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good suggestion. And in fact, this fellow who was, dogging me, tailgating me more or less, when I went down to Washington Street Extension, I saw that he did have a helmet strapped to the back of his bike, and you just think, good Lord. But
Does a lot of
I
good
think
on
that's
the
a really good suggestion, Joe, about actually having, for $5 or just to get them to actually think it through. So,
And I guess if the police can do random speed tests for cars, they should be able to do it every now and then for bikes as well. Or am I thinking too simple in that one?
no, not at all. But
Not at all.
the question is always how many police are available at any one time, and of course, summer specials have very limited powers, so I think at one point correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, if you're on the call still, that the police had no more than 4 officers available at any one shift to cover the entire island.
I think it depends, yeah, but I think you're right. It's sort of, I think they were really worried, but they got a few more than they thought this summer. But
Yeah.
I don't think they have a lot.
No.
Yeah, I mean,
One point I'd
place
make,
like,
Ian, we may not have to do a survey and spend a lot of time on it. What's the safe mile per hour on the bike path? I'd say it's probably about 15, and everybody should be under that.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to determine what bike is what, or whether it's an e-bike or whatever. If you're driving 50, 20, 25, drive on the road. You're going fast enough. I mean, maybe it's as simple as that.
Well, there you go, Matt. That's why you're a member of the select board, because you're cutting to the chase. That's exactly right. So,
But I feel like, Matt, and I agree with you, but I also feel that there needs to be some sense of education because the e-bikes, I mean, I don't see too many people getting a sense of it. And I've only ridden with one friend on an e-bike and he wore a helmet, but the rest of them, I don't see them wearing their helmet. So it's just, like, what is the legality of that? What is the, I don't want to get an insurance company or anything, go down that rabbit hole, but what is that legality and where do we define that? And, did we educate the people and did we give them all this, as much information as possible? Or if it was there, even when you go to register your car to go on the beach, you get a packet, where to drive, not to drive. And some people want to read it, don't want to read it, but at least you can say, because you've got that permit, it's stuck on your truck or car, whatever, that that you can only go here to here and that's it. So, and my registering or bringing up the education, it kind of jumps on Michelle's comment about like, this is what he grew up with. And I think that that's something important. Jason and I had one time talked about doing some program where you go to the school or you're at, Tom Nevis Field and you're having bike programs and how to ride a bike and get helmets and, work with the sheriff's department. And that was something we were working on that didn't really come to fruition, but this may be a perfect time and opportunity to kind of see if we can't roll that forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really see a difference. And that probably comes from then that, like in the Netherlands, that you learn how to ride a bike. Everybody learns how to ride a bike from such a young age. I can really see a difference with being behind American bikers, no matter whether it's an e-bike or a normal bike. And if I'm in the Netherlands behind bikers, it's just, it feels way more uneasy when I see people in America on a bike. Like it's almost like everyone is 4 or 5 years old in my mind. Kind of like not being able to go in a straight line. And I think that really comes also a little bit from an education piece, from being able to ride a bike from a young age.
well, Michelle, it's a big country. And if I had your email, and in fact, I think that's something I'd like to propose in, I guess, committee comments at the end, that we all exchange contact information. In Boulder, I've got a couple of pictures of a middle school where there's probably 200 bikes. This is in the summer, of course, not in the winter. 200 bikes in the bike racks around the school. So, depending on which part of the country you're in, Boulder has, as you may know, a strong history of biking. So,
I mean, the amount of bikes are increasing here at the school as well, actually, every year. We need to buy extra bike racks for the bike storage. So I mean, it is growing here as well.
But I don't think any of us are really. I don't think John was seriously talking about banning them. In other words, with the traffic jams we had this summer, and the more people we can get on bikes, the better. It's a question of doing it safely. So, Patrick, would you like to? Are there any transportation project updates you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I think for the most part, I just kind of wanted to go through a basic list of how we've organized the projects and point of contacts for the projects, as well as some priorities just based on what's been worked on previously in town. So between plus the regional planning staff, it's myself really for transportation, and then DPW, we sat down and talked about what's open, where we have money, where they are, potential like funding buckets. And I wanted to let you all know that my focus areas are really right now on the Wilwinnett side path and Orange Street in town, multi-use path or side path, whichever you want to call it. The thought here is that these two projects sort of pose different benefits. Wilwinnett, we have some federal award money that we need to kind of move forward and make sure we use. So that's why that one is prioritized quite high at the top there. And then Orange Street, this segment has received quite a bit of attention from various groups. I think last time there was a comment that Remain Nantucket was looking at sort of a path that goes around the creek. I think internally here at Plus, there's a thought that might be an alternative project, but it's not an either or, it's sort of a both, right? A need to do something on Orange Street itself, and then also a need to probably explore some options along the creeks and Remain is really leading that effort. I think our focus is connecting Orange Street, getting a better bike ped connection between Orange Street where the rail trail ends there at Goose Pond, and then the Rotary. My other focus points have been supporting the DPW on the Milestone Road path extension. That's their priority number 3. And then looking at our open contract for Sparks, Williams, and Pleasant, and trying to untangle funding commitments from the state for that project previously. So I just wanted to let you know, those are sort of the 4 things that I'm most focused on, in addition to supporting Lover's Lane, which is kind of morphed into that larger Surfside Road area improvements project. So if you ever have any questions about those projects or as they progress, we'll bring them to the group so you can take a look at the plans, provide some comments. And I would expect to see you within the next year or 2, 1 and 2 sort of move forward in the process here. Any questions?
Yes, do you liaise with Rachel Freeman and the Land Bank, who, because they're hoping to basically extend a pathway all the way along there as they solidify their purchases?
We've talked a little bit about the opportunities for a greater connection, and I think I would definitely like to coordinate with them a little bit further. As I sort of mentioned, I think there are 2 different projects that provide connectivity there, and one might be more leisure oriented, which is what the Land Bank might be looking at, and one might be more of a direct connection on Orange Street, which I think is what Plus, in coordination with DPW, is really looking at. So I think they're both great projects personally, and will provide a lot of benefits. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to move something forward soon.
Well, thank you for that clarification. So maintenance support. Item 3, repaving and striping needs. I'll lead off by saying that the 90+ cracks in the bike path going out to Sconset have all settled again. So it's teeth jarring and bicycle frame jarring. And there are plenty of divots, especially down at the bottom of the hill there, the Milestone Hill, that I'm sure unwary bicyclists have hit when there are no puddles to show where they are. And so is there any process being considered for repaving the Milestone bike path? And I mean, the Pulpus Road too has all sorts of problems, out by Turtle Pond, and to name just one.
What I can do is I can coordinate with Director Arsenault at the DPW to figure out their paving schedule to see if these 2 items, Pulpus as well as the Sconset bike path, are on paving schedule. And if they're not, maybe we could make a request as a group to Director Arsenault to get some feedback about when those items might receive some maintenance attention.
Yeah, I don't think they've, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they've ever been repaved. I think it's the original paving from the one on the Pulpus Road must be close to 30 years old.
I did that.
Did you really?
Yeah, when I was 14. It was a great job. I was driving 10 wheels and 18 wheelers down Milestone Road.
Yeah.
But I believe it was touched up one other time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely showing its age.
Yeah. And I mean, God forbid, I mean, as we know, as the sun is setting quicker, I can't imagine someone at 4 o'clock trying to get home. And they probably know the bike path, but someone new to Nantucket would be a little treacherous and scary at nighttime. So
yeah. Yeah. So sightline needs. Anybody have a request to Patrick? Oh, for striping needs, I guess I should have mentioned on the Matticat Road, just beyond the Massasoit Bridge dirt road, that curve, there's a hairpin curve, more or less, that doesn't have a divider on it, and I would have thought is overdue for a divider. Thankfully, the sight line has been cut back, but it's still, several times this summer, I take it into account, but there are people coming the other way, 3 abreast, and you can't really see them unless you're going very slowly. So I would have thought that would be one place where, a demarcation of the lane would be a reminder to people that when they can't see around a corner, that they should stick to one side.
All right, I've taken a note of that one, and I can add that to the list when we coordinate with Director Arsenault.
Thank you.
When you're talking about, it's Matt again, when you talk about sight lines, Tom David sends the Board of Select Board and DPW, et cetera, every year when it starts, the spring starts. He's out in the Walwinet area, Pulpus, Walwinet Road, and we don't cut the bushes back very well, and he complains about it every year. And he's correct. He rides a bike to Wisconsin and back, I believe, but it's more than just him. And so getting on a schedule and making sure that we're able to keep everything back, especially until there's a bike path on Walwinet Road, it's really dangerous. If people are trying to ride along that road with their kids on a bike with cars coming, it's treacherous. So I think the more that the DPW can have a true schedule and cut it back, a couple of 2-3 times a year, the better off we'll all be.
Thank you, Matt. So other business, any comments?
I actually, I don't know if I just had a question if we ever thought about like a continuous bike path or a continuous sidewalk that is kind of like a traffic, how do you say that? Like a, oh God, no, I forgot the name.
Do you want to stop the screen sharing there? Thank you.
So that if you're on Surfside, for example, and you have like a smaller side road, that you have kind of like a traffic bump that a car would need to go over. So all cars kind of need to yield for a continuous bike path that would be a little bit higher than the road.
Like a race crossing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a table or a crossing, yeah.
Yeah. I like a lot of those crossings would benefit of that, I think, in the sense that yeah, I mean, in my mind, that cars then need to yield a little bit more, because sometimes they think that there's nothing coming, or and then they just drive through. So that might just make it safer.
And possibly the opposite in appropriate places where you force the bikers to slow down because of a tabletop or whatever, because the cars really are the ones who should have the right of way. I'm thinking
not always, and I actually don't necessarily agree that cars need to have the right of way, especially not if you want to promote biking and walking.
And well, I mean, I'm thinking specifically, Tom Nevers and Milestone, where
Yeah,
I guess I feel like there's there may be only a few places where it's appropriate, but there are places definitely where the bikes should be slowing down. And they can be very reckless.
Well, that draws us into the conversation, John, of the supplemental posting that Patrick did with all the stop signs on the Pulpus Road.
Yeah, yeah,
And that sort of ties this on the Milestone. There are a number of private roads that have stop signs on the bike path. And in my opinion, and our Article 71 that was passed into law, they need to remove we need to remove those stop signs from the bike path there and make sure that the cars have the legal onus to stop, and the bikers are warned in a suitable fashion that there is a road coming in. Tom Nevers is a good example of where there's enough traffic where you do want a stop sign. So rather than a nuisance stop sign, so that bicyclists are really warned that they need to, stop or pay very close attention. So
yeah.
But I thought this is sort of a conversation for us going forward when we have all the members here, when everybody's got to have a look. I'll produce a map for the similar map for the Matticat Road as well, because Harvey and I ended up going around the island, and we have a spreadsheet of every intersection on the island with 37 miles of bike paths. So
Yeah, no, it's definitely a discussion. I'm just saying that that not all intersections are not the same. They really all need to be looked at, cut down to 3, 4, 12 categories, each of which has.
I also didn't mean like I was probably not explaining myself correctly, but I just mean more that if you have a smaller private road coming onto like a road like Milestone, or even like the Tom Nevers Road. I mean, the Tom Nevers main road is way too big for something like this. I actually personally think that the Tom Nevers Road axing with Milestone Road, that intersection should be a roundabout, but that's a whole different discussion, I guess. But more like smaller roads, private roads or public roads that come into a bigger road where you also have a separate bike path, that could maybe for the bike path part, where then the bike should also have the right of way, have like a raised so like continuous bike path, something like that. But of course, bikes should not have the right of way if they intersect with a big road like the Milestone Road or whatever. But it really depends on what kind of intersection or crossing it is.
All right. So I don't think we have any members of the public glued to their seats watching us. So would someone like move to adjourn?
Mr. Vice Chair, before we adjourn, would you like me to add to the list of discussion items with DPW the nuisance signage on Milestone?
Oh, please, and on Pulpus, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And on Matticat. I mean, I'm not sure if we need to give them a list that then they can act on, and maybe that's the way we should do it. What do my fellow committee members think, that we should present them with a complete list before we go forward on this?
I think we should all look at it first.
Yeah.
So we review it. Let's go over it.
Yeah. So, all right. So move to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Joe. Second.
I gotta go to the USTC.
All right. So I don't have everybody in alphabetical order. So Joe.
Aye.
Michelle.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Laura.
Aye.
And Matt,
Aye.
great. Well, thank you, everybody. And I'm glad we've got it up and running again. So I think it's going to be